Cool. Now we got our, oh, you know what, before we get our what's going on in JS land, who's got jobs they want to announce?
Again, Matthew Johnson, Senior DevOps Engineer over at Baker Technologies. We have a QE position open as well as Scrum Master and a Senior Full Stack.
Can the live stream hear that?
What?
What about the live stream?
I'm sorry, live stream, you're just not going to get the job opportunity. Seriously, anybody with job opportunities, feel free to mention DenverScript and Twitter, and we'll syndicate it out. Blinker's looking for a front-end developer.
You're welcome.
Yeah, fuck that guy. So if you're interested, we're looking for a mid-level to senior. Feel free to tag me, and we can talk about it afterwards. Anyone else have more job postings? Do you have specific job postings you want to say?
Yeah, so we're looking for front-end engineers of all varieties, DevOps in particular, and then back-end stuff. So anybody who can code, I'll probably have a conversation with.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to the team.
Until Friday.
Until Friday. Anyone else?
It's probably worth mentioning too that as you have job opportunities or you're looking, there's a discourse that's associated with Denver Devs that's a good spot to look. So.
Or topic gigs.
Or Gigs Day, yeah.
Was it Gigs Wednesday?
Gigs Wednesday.
Gigs
Tomorrow. It's a big day tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow.
Or any day. You
It's
can
tomorrow's
post
Wednesday. This week's already shot for me. It's gone.
We're very
Hold on. Great. So what's going on in JS land?
This is everybody, if you got things.
Yeah.
I'm also looking for a cleaning service, so.
Yeah. Well, we'll kick it off here. So for what's going on in JavaScript land, so Chrome 63 is out. Same as last time. We'll link the highlights video on the meetup screen. A couple quick highlights on what's there. Updated performance monitors. So, oh right, this is actually really cool. You can see live streaming of your performance metrics in real time. It's actually really cool. Your CPU usage, heap size, the DOM nodes. It's really neat. The console filtering UI, so up until now, one of the things they added actually recently was negative filtering, so you can do like minus signs for things you don't want to see in the console. That stuff's all still there, but now there's a little bar, little pop out that comes out on the side, and you can just check boxes of what you do and don't want to see based on what's appearing in your console. So you can still, and you can combine that with any advanced filtering you've been doing in the console, so that's really cool. You probably noticed this if you're on Chrome 63. Identical messages in your console are now grouped, and they just have like a badge counter of how many of them are there. That's really nice to keep you from spamming. You can also turn that off if you want to see in real time where those spam messages are falling in the cycle. And the last thing, like this isn't new, but they featured it in the video, and I figured it might be new to people because I think it's really cool, is if you haven't worked with the manual hover inspector, it's pretty neat. If you want to tab over, thank you. So basically, like we're hovering over that thing, right? If we want to see what it looks like when we hover without actually hovering it, select that DOM node, click on the hover inspector, click on hover, and it acts like it's actually hovering. So, right? Whoa, right? That's super cool.
Everyone, Bill and Ted did.
Whoa. So it's been around for a while, but if you haven't seen it before, pretty freaking cool, right? So that's all there. Like I said, these notes and the link we're gonna to the highlights video, which shows everything I said with live code examples, we'll put on the meetup. And so with that, what are you guys excited about? Any new stuff going on? Yeah.
Webpack 4?
Webpack 4.
Yeah.
There we go.
Found
Oh.
it. Nailed it.
So you can now use it without a config.
Sweet.
And it also has predetermined configs for production and development. Makes it a lot easier
I don't
to
believe
use.
it.
Yeah.
The thing that requires the most configuration is now configureless.
I still recommend making configurations.
Just
makes it easier.
Too, right?
Yeah, it did.
Almost twice as fast.
twice as fast. Bundle sizes are smaller too, by roughly anywhere between 18 and 20%.
And they got rid of common chunks plugins for a better alternative. Which
Right.
I just spent a ton of time learning common chunks plugins.
Everybody.
Welcome front end. Where your shit changes every 2 days.
What else are you guys excited about? Any other new stuff going on in JavaScript land?
Some of like Babel 7 maybe?
So Babel 7, we're using Babel 7, Garrett. No, it's, sorry, one project. That was me, my bad. So we are using Babel 7, it's in beta.
Yeah, there's a lot of new cool things in there, like optional chains in there. I believe the pipeline operators in there.
Yep.
All new cool goodies.
But you have to upgrade to Babel 7 to get optional chaining or pipeline operator.
What else? What else? Anything else, guys?
There was an article about using React's new context API instead of Redux, like replacing Redux with the context API,
Oh wow,
which seemed really cool.
nice. Definitely.
It was a
definitely-
16.3 alpha right now.
It's not released yet.
Yeah.
I was looking into that today because I was like, oh, okay.
If you have that article handy, definitely post it on the comments for,
Yeah.
for today's meetup. Anything else?
So I'd like to
Oh,
bring
that
up
must have been what.
a fairly obscure one every time.
Yeah.
If anyone's using React signature pad, it now supports React 16. So.
Speak
All
up, what?
of us.
Signature pad?
Like the signature, like you can draw a signature and then
Oh.
save it.
Sweet.
Plug it with
React
React
signature pad
16.
is now compatible with React 16. Anyone else? Obscure ones are welcome if you're excited about it.
Thanks, Ed.
CSS keylogger, I'm pretty excited about that. Pretty good.
What is that? Can you give a brief, what is
I don't know exactly all of the specifics. My understanding is the way React is doing stuff with input passwords is one of the.
No, it's just the CSS selectors. You could select an input box that has certain text in it, and so you could like just brute force it basically by saying, oh, if it's an input type password with A, then put this background image. So you're basically making that AJAX request. So your keylogger.
Essentially, it's like you know how you can target by like value type or like any of those type of things. When you do it, you essentially wind up with here's a certain password based on URL request to your server. Yeah.
I'll Google it later.
It's all
Give you the
CSS. That's
TLDR.
All right, well, same as we mentioned last month, and like Garrett was saying before, this section today, we'll usually kick it off with something that's going on, but really, the more stuff you guys bring to talk about, the more that this will work out. And for those of you taking pictures, definitely please do, but this whole list we're also going to post on the meetup link as well, so don't feel like you have to scribble everything down right now. Sweet. One last thing that I want to say that I don't know if we explicitly thanked CJ for bringing his whole rig and helping us do our first live
Think
stream.
about
We want to try and start recording the meetups, and also if you're at home and can't make it, we'll be live streaming them. We linked our YouTube account with our Twitter account, so when the stream starts, a tweet will go out with a link to watch it. So if you can't make it, you can watch that, and afterwards it'll be recorded on YouTube at the same link.
social media.
Sweet, thank you.
Awesome. Well, does anyone else have anything else to put up there? Okay. Mr. Dahlman. Yeah. Woo. Drew Dahlman is going to talk about Dockerize. All the things. That's my glasses and I'm not never got them.
But am I gonna use this thing? Oh
Yeah.
boy. Oh man.
It's gonna mess up your beanie look though.
Actually, you can just use the mic.
Yeah, our audio feed actually kind of died, so you can use the mic.
Turns out you've just been talking and nobody.
well, we're taking it off of the.
Wait, is this better?
This is yours? Okay. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do that.
Dongles.
I got dongles for dongles.
Thanks, Apple.
Dude.
You guys have it? How many people have the new MacBooks? It's like they're really cool, and like the size and things is nice, but like the dongle situation is a pain in the ass. You're like, cool, I gotta go to this meeting, and you're like sitting there, you're like, cool, I'm the asshole who's supposed to be presenting right now. This is gonna work well, and then you gotta run back to it's just such a thing. Maybe it'll work.
Are you gonna use the mic?
Oh yeah. All right. Oh yeah. Hey, there it is. All right. Cool. So, hello. Before we start, there is a GitHub repo for this. If you guys want to follow along, you totally can. And go for it if you like. I posted this in the comments of the meetup as well, so you can pull that down. The repo itself covers a lot, and tonight we're gonna, as I was kind of going through and doing this, I kind of figured, okay, I'm just gonna bust the fucking hits out. So that's kind of the way we're gonna approach this. But there's a ton in there, and there's a ton kind of linked to the docs and talking about Docker and things like that. So with that, hi, my name is Drew Dahlman. I am a technical director and senior developer at a place called Legwork Studio. We're here in Denver. I'm also the founder of Develop Denver, which is a conference that's held every August. This is going to be our 7th year this year, so yeah, it's a wild time. If you guys have gone before, you see some shirts around here and some stickers. It's a good time. I am Aspartum on Twitter. If you'd like to tweet, I put a lot of stupid shit out there, but like sometimes I like to get into fights about code. And I'm also Drew Dahlman on Denver Dev Slack. I am the guy that channels you at inconvenient times. Hi.
Tomatoes.
A couple more of these, and that's going to happen again tonight. All right. So yeah, that's me. So if you guys are following along, I recommend that you already have Docker installed. I'm assuming things, but we're going to get started with that. And we're going to talk about Dockerizing all the things. So, before we get a start, I want to kind of feel out read the room a little bit. Who here is familiar with using VMs in development? Right? Okay, cool. What about using Docker in kind of your everyday life type of thing? Okay, sweet. What about taking it a step further and writing your own images and using Docker Compose and things like that? All right, cool. Sweet. So, some of this is going to be a little bit, you're going to be like, cool, all right, know that, and then some of this might be awesome, and I don't know, we're going to figure it out. So, let's do this. You know what sucks?
Right, my ears.
Tell me what sucks. All right, we're going to have a therapy session here. Dongles! Dongles! You know what sucks beyond dongles is dependencies and version issues. Holy fuck. Right? How many times have you ever, like, let's say you're starting on a new project, right? You get hired at a company and you are getting spun up on potentially like a legacy code base, and that has its own specific versions of Node or Ruby or anything. And instead of just kind of getting up to work and getting up to speed on the code base itself, you spend a day sitting with like an ops guy or your technical director and somebody setting things up and working through codes and bugs, right? That's really annoying. Not to mention, you update your OS and you're like, oh God, everything is gonna be terrible. I don't know why I hit that button, but I did, and I wholly regret everything. There's a better way. Who's familiar with Vagrant? Hands? Okay. So the idea is, right, so currently you have your computer, and you go in, you run into these version issues. But what if there was a better way to do this? What if we were to actually simulate our environment that we're actually going to be deploying to, be it like Ubuntu in certain node specific node version, certain Ruby version, certain whatever version. And you can spin that up. And what Vagrant came along, it's been really popular over the past past many years. And it came along and it introduced this idea of, the works on my machine no longer exists. It actually just works on everybody's machine. The problem is with Vagrant is that each virtual machine includes not only your application and all of its libraries, but the entire guest operating system as well, which can result in massive file load, right? If you've worked in Vagrant, you can attest to this, right? You start running Vagrant boxes, and the next thing you know, it's like, I have this like 4 gig box that's just a virtual machine running Ubuntu, and then I have another one that's doing that, and at the same time, it crushes my entire system, right? So it was awesome, and it's still very cool, and it's still very applicable. It still totally works. But there's a new guy in town, all right. His name is Docker. And Docker takes a similar approach in creating virtual machines and allowing you to take your environment that you have, your code that's local, and run it in a simulation that would essentially be your staging and your production environments. But what's cool about Docker is it uses a concept called containers. So it uses containers and it shares the OS. Containers run as an isolated process on the host operating system, but not tied to specific infrastructure. So that's a lot of words. Let's talk about what the fuck that means, right? So the idea here is, remember when we were talking about Vagrant? Vagrant, literally every single time you spin up a Vagrant instance, it's spinning up a whole new machine. That means that is gigs of data that's going to be eaten up on your local machine. With Docker, what's awesome is it shares the kernel. Okay, so we're going to get a little into there, but the idea is essentially, imagine I am going to spin up a box and it's going to all be running on Ubuntu, and it's going to have a Node and a Ruby app running on top of it, right? What's cool with Docker is that it shares that base image. Ubuntu is shared. Node can be shared. Many of these things can all be shared between different projects. And so what's awesome about this is that you have this compartmentalized different pieces of your app fitting together. And so instead of winding up with that massive bloat, you can literally run tons of containers all together, and your memory usage is way lower in terms of storage. It can totally bite you in the ass on some CPU issues, and we're going to talk about that. But the overall benefits of it is it's faster, it's easier to create and scaffold. I have a question.
My issue, one that I don't really understand about sharing the OS is, let's say I'm running on Mint, and the Docker image is from Ubuntu. It'll work.
Yep.
But it can't be sharing the OS because they aren't the same OS.
No, so that's where you can totally do that, but the thing is it's instead of importing all of everything, it's importing just the essentials needed and required for your specific app. So if you take into consideration about that, like if you notice, if you have worked in like Docker, for instance, prior, if you spin up a new app that contains maybe a different language or something like that, a different dependency, you'll notice that the actual Docker Compose up or the Docker up, like, it takes a little bit longer, and the reason being is that it's actually fetching what it needs. And so that is part of that idea, is that it's sharing the core pieces of it and allowing it to be kind of extended, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So those are a lot of words, and you've probably seen charts like this, and then you're hearing me talk, and I feel like I'm trying to explain right? You've seen this, and I'm standing up here, and I'm like, oh, okay. There's all these cool things that we can do, and like this guy, it's Carol. It's Carol in the mailroom. But we can simplify this, and let's talk about it. So Docker is actually, it's super intimidating at first to get into, and it can be something that you're like, oh, what is happening? But take a slow approach, and it kind of is really awesome, and let's do that. So these things called Docker files. So Docker files, on Docker they have a thing called Docker Hub, which allows you to download images from any kind of thing you want. If you want like a PHP app or a WordPress app or a Ruby app or a Node app, you can instantly have that access to that image, and it comes prepackaged with everything you need. What's really cool is that you can make your own, and you can ship them, and you can share them, you can open source them, or you can just keep them inside of your repos and actually allow for your team to build off of those. So let's take a look at, here's the Docker file. So this one right here, it's based off of Node 8.7. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm version locking this, right? So you know how we were talking about versions, how you could have a different version. Remember, you know, we've got NVM or RVM or RBNV, all those things, and like even today, and I was not responsible for this portion of things that happened, but we dealt with version issues, and it's crazy how minimal things can change. So lock it down, right? And then it runs just like any other Linux distro. You can run your updates, you can install anything in here. I could literally install, if I wanted to install Git, or I wanted to install any other kind of dependencies on the server, on the box itself, I could. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a directory. I'm gonna say make dir app, okay? And then I'm gonna say, hey, set my working directory to app. And then I'm going to add everything from the root of my project into app. Sweet. And then we're just going to run npm install. So what's neat about that, if you're following along in there, this is kind of what that looks like. Let me blow that up. Boop. Yeah, you can see it. This is the Docker file for all of this, right? And these are all of the files. I have an index, a package, and a README. So I'm going to throw that in there. You could be super specific with this. You could literally pinpoint exactly where on the system you want files to go, anything. You can coordinate all of that. For this, we're going to keep it simple. So then there's this other great thing called Docker Compose. So when Docker first initially came out, it was a little confusing, and that was actually part of the barrier to entry was learning Docker. But with the introduction of Docker Compose, it was a way of assembling your containers and a way of seeing exactly how these things are going to play together. So this is a super simple Docker Compose file. This one is using 2. You'll see varying versions within there. There's not a whole lot of difference. There's some niceties with 3, but for the most part, they are very consistent in terms of the way that it actually works. So we have, a version, we have some services, we've got a build, a context, a Docker file, some volumes, a command. Okay, cool. I don't know what that means. Let's run it. All right. Let's just see what happens. So I'm going to run Docker Compose up. So.
Make it bigger.
You see it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to run that. And what I got was, hey, here's the npm install. But what you'll notice is that it's in builder. And then you'll notice this console log, hello from the container. That's what my index.js says. Hello from the container. Neat. So essentially, that just ran from inside of a container. That's not my machine. I didn't really do anything. So how does it work, right? Fucking magic. End of story. Moving on. No, let's not talk about this. So Docker is composed of these ideas of services, right? So when you're building out your Docker project, you want to identify your services. And your services are generally when you modularize code, right? And what's really awesome is the way that code and development in general is moving these days is modularize everything. And why? Because it's awesome. It works so much better. And it reduces a lot of the headache that can be involved with some of these things. So here's a great example. I have my service called Builder. Builder could be anything. I could call this Drew's awesome web app. I could call this front end. I could call this source. I could call this whatever I wanted, but I'm just going to call it Builder. And then I'm going to give it some build instructions. I'm going to tell it what its context is. Its context is where does it live in relativity to the rest of this application. Right now it lives on the root. And then I'm going to say, where does its Docker file live? Remember that Docker file that we looked at right here? Oh, no. Right here? This is its Docker file, and it just lives on the root. And then volume. So in our Docker file, if we go ahead, you guys know about that? If you hit T in GitHub, you can search through all your files. It's a really neat thing. So you know how in here we said add app? We said add the root of our app to our app. Right here in volumes, what we're doing is almost creating a symlink between those things. So anything that I change on my local version is going to have reflections inside of my container. So I don't actually even have to work inside of my container. Once it's running, I can just code. I don't have to worry about this shit. And then I have a command of npm start. And if we look at our package, all it has is node index, it runs the index. Cool. So it's not like that crazy. So commands though, this is when Docker gets wild. So there's a lot of commands. And I would highly recommend you go and look through these. But some of the basics, kind of the good things to know, and when you're kind of getting into all of this, the obvious ones are, Docker Compose PS. List any running containers, right? So sometimes you might have a container that's running and you're kind of like, where did that come, what's happening right now? And I'm getting a weird conflict. You can see them. Docker Compose up, it starts our project. Docker Compose down stops our project and does remove them. Sometimes it doesn't. There are weird things, and I'm not gonna lie, and you might see some of this later on here. But there's always a way to get rid of things, or always a way to kind of, the more kind of projects you work on and things like that, it's nice to keep things clean. So you can always just run an RM to remove it. Docker Compose down V removes volumes. So if you've mounted any volumes, what's really cool in this is that I have a number of projects. At work, what we do, I do like SQL dumps, and I have literally a SQL file that represents a database. And then when a teammate picks it up, they say Docker Compose up, and within our Docker files, we say mount this database. And then from there, it's you're not having to like work through anything. You're not having to resync anything. It literally is just part of the repo that goes through dev. And you can unmount those or remount those. It's kind of an awesome thing, as well as all of your other linked volumes that you possibly have. Docker images is going to list all of your images, right? So we talked about containers and we talked about images. Images are your big guys. They basically orchestrate everything, and your containers just kind of live on top of those. And then Docker help. Always look for the help. You never know when you're going to need it, because yeah, it's nice. But then there's this kind of times when you're like, I need to kill this with fire, and it's the worst. So I'm going to do something tonight that, you know, it could work out, it could not. So what this is going to do is it's going to kill all running containers. Let's run it. Cool, I just killed a bunch of containers. If I go in here and I run, for instance, Docker images. So these are all the images that I have on my machine right now. And you can see, like, even file size wise. You know, they kind of vary in size. Some do reach in those gig marks, but like compared to Vagrant, and when you get really heavy into a project, it can get crazy. Fuck it, I'm gonna toast it, I don't care. All right, so we're gonna go. So this is what's cool about Docker, is that it doesn't matter. There's zero concern for me. It's literally, man, there's the oh boy. But what's cool with this concept is that for teams, right? So say you are, you know, you're head of engineering, or you're DevOps, or you are, you know, leading a team of developers, you can use Docker to be able to create a situation that they're not going to have to worry about their dependencies. They're not going to have to worry about, you know, installing X, Y, and Z, and then doing like this thing to do that thing, and setting up their paths and any of that. No. With this computer, when I got this computer, I've not installed anything globally in about like a year and a half. I literally have Docker and then my IDEs, and then I have Node. I have like some essentials, but for the most part, in theory, you wouldn't have to need any of that. Cool, so that's gonna keep doing its thing. Working with services, so it's really neat too with Docker is that you can run one-off services. So if I wanted to execute just a command on like a running container, say I wanted to like, let's say I have like a Node app and I wanted to install a new dependency, I could say Docker exec, say my service name is builder, npm install lodash -- save. Run that. If it's already running, it's going to install that, and it's immediately available to me. If it's not running and I want to take some other action on it, maybe I want to actually explore like the file system or anything like that, I can do Docker run service name command. And what Docker run is going to do is it's going to actually boot the machine up. So that's still really good at this time.
Use Docker prune.
Yeah.
Make it bigger.
Enhance.
Oh. So yeah. So right now, because I probably already deleted all of that, and you absolutely can. Who said Docker prune? Yep. So you can use prune to actually go through and find like the specific images. Yeah, exactly. You can find all of them. The thing that I've found is that Docker can be rather intensive to your memory, and it can get a little wild. So what I like to do is just kind of keep it at a bare minimum, but totally up to you. There are, and again, look at the docs. There's so much to this, and the docs are actually really, really awesome. So it's actually, I think I'm fighting with it. Let me stop that. Cool. All right, so this just went in, and the reason that you saw it kind of like hang up there was because it was like trying to delete it. But right now, if I look at where I'm at, I see a replica of my, you know, the project that I'm in. But if I cd into kind of the root, cool, I'm actually inside of another computer right now. And if you notice, if you're familiar with any of this, so remember when we said we made that app, right? Inside of app lives our app. So if I come in here and was to make a change to that file, and then if I were to well, hi. See how that works? It's kind of neat. So you can use these services for installing things and working within them, and we're actually going to get a little bit more into that. That was my thing. All right, what about larger applications, right? So what we just looked at was kind of a smaller, just like one-off, like, okay, that was neat, cool, neat, cool. Let's talk about a larger application. Here's a legacy Rails app. Okay, so this one actually has a few more services that we're going to be using. This is the Rails app, and again, this is all outlined inside of the repo that I posted. It literally says legacy Rails app, and then you can go through the README, and you can do all of those things. So inside of here, though, I'm identifying my services, right? So I've got my bundle. For those of you who are familiar, it's you run your bundle. Where I want to store those files and that data. I have a DB, and I'm going to give that an image. If you look at this, like image of Ruby latest, this actually should probably be locked down, but I was in kind of a rush, but getting that. But you should lock that down. Your DB, so I'm going to use Postgres, and then what's cool is I'm going to define the ports, right? So I'm going to run this on 5432 on my local machine. It's going to be the equivalent of 5432 on my guest machine. And then let's pass it some environment variables. Give it a user, give it a password, and then volumes. This is where we can store our data. If you wanted to do database dumps, we could actually point to this, and we could actually have our SQL dumps on our local machine from our virtual machine, and we can reload those type of things. And then I have my app, and this basically has a Docker file. This Docker file is going to describe installing Ruby, anything other dependencies that I might need, those type of things, and then some more environment variables. And then I'm going to link it up with my app, which means that I want everything from the root. So that means as I update things, it gets updated in my app. And then I'm going to say volumes from, where I'm basically saying, here's where I'm getting some data from. I'm going to expose some more ports, right? So 3,000 on my machine means 3,000 on that machine. And then I'm going to say depends on. And depends on is going to be something that this machine requires the database to exist. If that doesn't exist, then we're going to have some problems. So kind of walks through like that. And that's neat. But here's where the magic happens. And this is kind of a neat thing. So this is just our database YAML in our Rails project. And you see the normal things. You can see your adapter, your encoding, database that you're hitting. These could all be just environment variables if you wanted to. But what it gets really interesting is this, the host, right? And so instead of hitting localhost or an external IP or anything like that, and this applies to anything that you do within Docker. This could be WordPress, like PHP, you could, any of those things. Instead of hitting an actual named service, you utilize the Docker service. So this is DB, because guess what? I depend on it. And so it in its voodoo, in its magic, is allowing you to actually interface with these other containers that are totally running separately, but they're able to talk with each other, and it's creating the network for themselves. Cool, so that's a lot of stuff. This is a lot to get through, and again, I highly recommend going through kind of the repo to really get a grasp of some of the other things that we can do, but let's start talking about the simplest thing. Stop installing globally. Don't install things globally. I guarantee you your life will be so much easier if you stop. Sometimes it's impossible, but like it's very possible to do this, especially if you take small approaches and small steps. So let's talk about some of those things. So for instance, when I run, an npm list dep 0, I literally just get npm 542. I do have npm installed, and that is just to deal with some other things, but it feels so good. This is nice. So again, the old way is to install updates to your OS, install the language that you're going to be using, then install the framework per the version of the language, for the version of maybe your OS, and then install those dependencies, cross your fingers, hope it works, and then start debugging and figuring out why it's not working and understand exactly how to fix all of those things. Versus a new potential way is to install Docker, configure a Docker file, configure Docker Compose, and then run it up, and you're good to go. And if you're working on a team, this makes team development so much faster. I guarantee, like, it is absolutely night and day what we've seen in terms of adopting this approach to literally everything. And let's talk about what literally everything means, right? So simple tasks, right? So the other day, I have a rule that if I do anything more than 3 times or I get annoyed with it, I write a script to do it for me, because fuck that noise, man. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I wrote this, oh no. Let's open it up. Thought I opened it, but I didn't. Cool. Oh no. Yeah. So I wrote this thing. It's called certbot CloudFront, right? So in using Let's Encrypt to add SSL to a CloudFront instance, that can actually be kind of a pain in the ass, especially on OS X. It actually, there's a version, like the PHP versions don't like each other. You essentially have to be in. You would have to create a PHP or a Python 2 virtual environment in order to run the actual certbot CLI. So instead, I was sitting there and I'm like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? Because we have a ton of static sites that are out there and they're just running on CloudFront. I'm like, cool. I'm going to throw some encryption on those things. So I made a Docker project, and I put like a, I don't know if you can I zoom that? No, I can't zoom those. Basically, we just have some projects in here, and I can essentially go in and pick whichever Docker Compose file that I want and be able to run those things, right? So, for instance, here's a site that we just did, and I have, my AWS key is secret, a bucket name. These are obviously private. You could also do this in a very different way where you are literally using your AWS credentials. But so if I was to go in and do
live stream on YouTube forever.
What's that?
It's on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's gonna change. So let's go to labs. Let's go CloudFront. Right. So I'm gonna say Docker Compose. I'm gonna specify my name. Compose slash Docker Compose 2017.yaml. Up. Oh boy, what did I do? There it is. So I'm going to run this. What's cool about this? It's going to go through, it's going to build my box. And this is what you're going to generally see. Remember, I toasted all of my machines earlier, right? So I have literally nothing. So it's going to go through and download stuff. This might take a little bit of a second, but as it goes through and does this, the entire idea for me is, okay, hey, our Let's Encrypt certificate is expiring in X, Y, and Z days. Cool, I'm just gonna go in here and just load that up, boom, done, all right, we're good. And right there, it was a simple little task to go ahead and do it. Let's see if we can do this. Complete, whole complete. It's gonna take a little while, that's fine. So, you can also scaffold apps. So here's a different idea. Remember how I was saying don't install anything globally, right? That's kind of a scary idea at certain points because you're like, cool, I'm gonna scaffold out like an Express app, or I'm gonna scaffold out these things. What's neat, oh, there it goes. I'm just gonna let this thing do its thing. Cool, so it pulled everything that it needed. It's obtaining a new certificate, going through, gets its verification. Really got some speed going. There it goes. Congratulations, your chain has been saved. Cool. So that means that my CloudFront instance has now just been renewed in terms of Let's Encrypt. It was easy. But what if we wanted to scaffold an app, right? So let's go back out and let's do Dockerize all the things. So if I'm going to scaffold an app, right? Okay, so this is where things might go totally off the rails. You ever seen like a live coding example just go totally terrible? Here we go. All right. Just let the Lord decide. Here we go. So I'm going to make a directory and I'm going to call this scaffold DS demo. Cool, so now I'm inside. There is literally nothing inside of there. Let's go ahead and open her up. Cool, so the very first thing I'm gonna do is I'm probably just gonna make a new folder and I'm gonna call it Docker, right? And then inside of there, I'm gonna make a Docker file. I'm gonna call this dockerfile.express. Right? We're gonna scaffold out an entire express using the express generator. So we already have a couple of these examples kind of in there, and I'm gonna just pull from that to avoid any of that stuff. This is what I want, just that. So what this is gonna do, right? We've seen this before. We're gonna start with node.js. I'm gonna run any updates. Again, this is totally optional. You really don't need this. I'm going to add everything from my app directory. I'm going to make a directory called app, and then I'm going to add everything. I'm going to make that my work directory, add everything, and then I'm going to install globally Express Generator, right? So that's neat. Cool. That's done.
Do you install everything globally in your containers?
No, you don't have to, and let's actually talk about that. So then I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call that one Docker Compose YAML. Right, so the very first thing we want to do is set the version, 3, services. All right, so let's call this Express, and I'm going to give it what its build instructions are going to be. Right, so what its context is, guess what? This thing lives right in a root. Its Docker file is located in docker/dockerfile/.express. Neat. All right, so then, wait a second. We are adding our files to it, but we actually need to symlink those. So what we need to say is volumes, and I'm going to say everything in the root belongs in app. Neat. What else does Express have? Let's go ahead and just give this a shot and see what happens, right? So if I say DC up, oh, it's working. Cool, so it's going through and installing all of those dependencies. Neat. Right, so what that just did is it installed the Express generator on my container. So if I were to go DC run Express bash, now I'm inside of my app, and I can see all my stuff, right? But if I do Express period, oh, hey, look, I have Express installed. Do you want to install this? It's an empty directory. Yeah, I do. Let's do it. Here's what's cool. So I don't know if you guys can see this. I wish I could. Can I make that bigger? No. So I don't know if you can see that, but
Can you pinch the zoom? Nope.
Not in the sidebar. So what that did, though, here I can show you here. So this right here is the last time I ran a listing of the directory, and now this is what happens when I run the directory listing now. All of these things have been generated. They now live on the machine as well as in my actual local machine. That's pretty sweet. I want to run npm install. Look at that. Now I'm just running those things. This is all, again, within the container. Cool. Sweet. So if we look at this, one thing you will notice is that node modules actually do exist on my machine. Now, that's kind of a weird thing. But you can get rid of those things. You can say something like volumes and so if I do something like that, actually, exit this machine. Cool, so no more node modules. And I'm actually going to add a command. I want to say command of bin bash c as a command. I'm going to say npm install and npm start. Cool, neat. If I run that, so now my Docker Compose up. So essentially what I just did, what did I do? Go to this. Live coding. Okay. So what it's going to do right now is it's actually going to go through and install everything that npm, the package JSON got updated when I installed Express. It did all of those things. It scaffolded all of that out. Now if I go here and I say localhost 3000. Oh wait, why does that not work? Do you guys know why that doesn't work? Ports. I'm going to say 3000 is my machine, 3000 is its machine. I paid for it. DC up, okay, boom, does its thing. Okay, now it's running. Neat, we have an Express app, right? So we can see all of that. Cool, let's actually change some stuff. Let's go into our view, change this, welcome to just, oh hey. Cool. This is all running within a container. And you can have any team pick this up and immediately just run Docker Compose up, and you have an entire project running. You can put all of your dependencies, you can put everything. So let's actually do something like that. See how this is running right now? So I'm going to actually go into,
Okay.
Trying to get my machine updated. It's like, oh, it's not working because you forgot to run.
So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to run Docker Compose exec express dash now inside of that. And I'm going to say npm install. So let's take a look at our package JSON. Great, so you see what we have installed there. I'm going to say npm install lodash. Save. Cool. It's going to go through and do all of that. And we have lodash on both our container and our machine. So now lodash is totally available for us to use within our app. That's a really neat way to do things, right? You don't have to have everything installed locally. You can literally go through and do that. And if you're running in a language that uses generators or any kind of generation scripts, again, like I just showed you there, is you can literally essentially SSH into your container and run all of those things and not ever have to have it on your local machines. Write microservices. So one of my new favorite languages is a language called Crystal. Crystal is it's written like Ruby and compiles to as fast as C, and it's awesome. It's super cool. And you're like, cool, all right, I'm gonna make use of this. So I started writing like little microservices for some other apps that I have, and it's fantastic to use. If I'm working in local or if I'm shipping this out, I can literally just spin this thing up and instantly be able to work on things. I don't have to worry about dependencies. I don't have to worry about any of those things. And it's fun. It's fun to be able to create a quick sandbox for your code, right? So again, going back to just create Docker containers to hold everything. Dockerize old apps. This is always a really fun challenge. This is a wild time, and your mileage may vary. But it is a really good challenge and a great way to actually learn the full ins and outs of Docker in terms of orchestrating apps, and especially if you're coming from like a Vagrant side or anything like that, let's figure out how to get this in there. So I encourage you to go through and Dockerize your old apps and figure out better ways to utilize these things. Some closing thoughts. Look at the documentation. There is a ton of there. As I was going through and putting all of this together, I was like, man, I have like 30 minutes to say a lot of words and things, and I can't get it all out. The repo is a really good place. If you are just getting started, take a look at the repo. It's going to get you kind of up to speed. In terms of deployments, the cool thing with Docker is that you can actually deploy these containers. You can use these in production. You can use these in staging. So that hits that parity of my dev, my staging, and my production are literally the exact same. That's what we all strive to have, right? Like it's always the total pain in the ass. If I were to give a talk on that, there would be a whole other talk. But look up, there's Docker Swarm, there's Kubernetes, there's lots of documentation in terms of getting those things out there. If you're on DigitalOcean, they literally have a one-click Docker like app, and you can start getting like running with that. And it'll blow your mind. You're like, oh, it works. It just works. This is amazing. Check it out. So yeah, thanks guys. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, things along those lines? Yeah.
I have a somewhat silly question. So people keep saying this word microservices. Does that require me to have a Docker container, or like if I have a bunch of APIs that talk to each other, is that also microservices? I don't know.
No, not necessarily. The idea of a microservice is that it's a one-off job. You have you would utilize a microservice in terms of I want it to be doing this particular thing. What's nice when thinking about like a microservice would be I'm going to throw it in a container. It's its own little container that I could actually throw around to different things. And you can actually set up your Docker files in the registry to pull down code and things like that to be utilized in other areas.
Because it isolates even more.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean that's the whole idea is I'm going to create something that I'm just going to throw at a couple different things, or I'm going to customize for this thing. But the idea is that it's offloaded from the rest of your application. Yeah. Anything else?
I tried using, at my previous job, I tried using Docker to isolate Chrome instances from each other, and immediately ran into a brick wall because I had no idea how to deal with Docker and drivers. How would I even go about looking at that kind of thing, where there's parts of the OS that need, significant parts of the OS that need to be included?
I do not have the answer for that, but I literally just saw something about that, and that is oddly either maybe you posted somewhere or like somebody literally was just talking about something like that. I actually am not totally sure on exactly that. I'm sorry. Ah, all right, yeah.
DenverDevs has a Docker channel too. That
Yeah.
There's like heroes in there all the time.
Yep. Yeah. Anything else?
If you need to pull like stuff from like BigQuery or whatnot on the cloud, like you can just run a command or just hit an endpoint easily.
If you wanted to pull something from it? Yeah, I mean, just imagine it like it's its own little server that runs on your machine. I mean, it works the exact same way. You can expose as many ports as you want. You can expose whatever things you want to expose, you can. And just imagine it as an extension of your OS, but also of your actual environment that you're working in. You know, your dev, your staging, and your production should always be the same. And that parity right there is imperative, because if those aren't, then you're gonna go and you're gonna hit the deploy button. And you're like, cool, we did that on a Friday at 5, and I'm like 2 beers deep. That was a good idea, not so much. And yeah.
Is there caching or sharing of these images? Or
Yeah.
is it just like, so you use your OS and you build on top of it?
Yeah, but you can use like Docker Hub. What I would look at is Docker Hub and you can share your own images. Like you can create specific versions of things. Like I have like an image that I created for like WordPress instances where it comes bundled in with all of the things that I need for it in terms of getting something running immediately. And you can share those things out on Docker Hub. There's a ton of like base images are always there, and that's kind of where you can essentially when you're creating your Docker file, you utilize Docker Hub to find those. Yeah, and you just connect the pieces. That's really imagine it like Legos. You're putting the things together, and you're able to connect. And beauty of open source is that it's all out there.
In that Docker file, the from command there, that was specifying the base image for
Yeah.
for
Yes. Yeah. So
Python version that
Ex-
says Python container.
exactly.
built on top of. Cool.
Yeah, like if you look at this, like I'm literally saying from Docker to Python 2. And so you can specify your versions, and that right there is one of the biggest wins. You know, you don't have to deal with struggling with versions or anything like that. If you sometimes you run into like those instances where you're running something that is like archaic, and you're like, oh god, guess what? There's probably an image out there for you, and you can pull that down, and might not be easy, but you can actually work your way through it. You can actually understand what is going on.
You have to set up a repo first?
What's that?
You have to set up a repo or an origin first? So it knows where to find Python?
No, that's directly from Docker Hub. So it automatically does that, and you can specify this if you have like specifics. You can specify those type of things. But this one right here, it kind of knows. It's very similar to kind of like it's package management. We've gotten better at that these days. CJ.
So I think I kind of understand how it's working, but how is it that you have I guess it's probably not a copy of your files locally and in the thing. So when you ran the generate command, you had access to those files, and when you edit them, they're edited, but they're the same on the Docker image. So is it like the volume is like virtually mounted inside of that?
Yes, it's almost like a symlink. So imagine it where, if we look at the Docker compose, when I say volumes, what I'm saying is volumes means anything from my local machine now belongs to this and that to this. And so they kind of talk to each other. In the Docker file, these are two separate commands, and these can be used in different ways. When I say add, what I'm doing is just a one-time copy. There's copy and then there's add. And you can add and you can copy files, but those are a little bit different than utilizing the actual volumes, where my version belongs to this version. And when you can hook that up the correct way, you're able to actually just completely interface and not even think about things. What's cool too is you can run like full like disks of things. Like I've hooked this up before with like we have a gulp boilerplate where it literally just surrounds the whole thing, and then instead of if I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna run a disk, that project, that boilerplate, that base project is already version locked, so it already knows exactly where it needs to be. And here's my distant code. If I want to say, your clients have different deployment needs or things like that, you can literally just deploy that using, Castrano, or if you're going to be using like any kind of CI tools or anything like that, you can run full disks through all of this. And because of those linking, you have access to your native as well as the actual container. Awesome. Yeah. Do we do it?
What's Kubernetes?
Kubernetes is actually, it stands for like master sailor or something like that. Essentially, it's a way of orchestrating everything. And you have Docker Swarm, which is kind of the part of Docker itself, and that's how they implemented like kind of orchestrating scaling and things like that. Kubernetes is another way that you can actually deal with your infrastructure of your whole cloud. Again, that is a whole other talk that we can totally get into, but we'd have to sit down and start doing that.
I have a concern.
Yes.
You haven't changed your AWS keys yet.
Oh god. No.
This was live.
It's okay, I'm gonna change those. Done. Delete that. That user is gone. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed it. And check out Docker and check out the repo. Again, I posted it on the comments within the meetup. And yeah, hell yeah.
Nice.
You fucking did it!
Next up is Morgan.
I brought a dongle just in case.
I forgot my dongle.
Dongles for days. Right there.
That was way off.
Are we good?
Yep.
All right, cool. I am saying something. Is that good? Better? Worse? No? Yes? How about now? How about now?
There we go. No,
Something.
Check.
Check. Check, please. That's how you get out of the cult. Check, please. It's the code word. Check, please. Check, please.
CJ, it's good enough.
Is it?
Yeah.
Good enough is always fine for what we do. It's great.
You're asking the people in the front row if they can hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Good.
Just talk to me, that's fine.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yes. Well, they say to just picture like people naked, but I just like to picture one specific person naked.
That's just
They're not here. All right. So Drew gave such an amazing talk that I have redone my format. Come on. Is it supposed to work? There we go. It's going.
Sometimes.
It's showing up eventually. All right. There we go. So I'm going to talk all about Kubernetes. Because we just learned about Docker. So let's hear another heady-ass tech talk. I am totally kidding. We're doing Choose Your Own Adventure. So this is all about how to thrive in technical environments amongst uncertainty, change, conditions. Essentially, the definition of a startup, as defined by Eric Ries in the book The Lean Startup, is an entity that is able to, what? Okay, I will not at all, ever. So is able to exist despite extreme uncertainty and change, and so that's kind of where this came from. Man, Drew wasn't even here for the first slide.
Jerk.
Son of a bitch. So, my name's Morgan. I take my wine very seriously because I don't have human children, but box wine works just fine. I'm a UI architect at Charter Communications in the Tech Center. I'm a native. That makes me extra salty about the housing prices. I like to run, I like to hike, I race cars as a hobby in the summertime, and I love to speak. So those are the big things about me. All of the social media things that I'm on, I do a lot on Instagram. I mostly post pictures of cocktails and mountains and my pets. I'm very rarely on Twitter, but every once in a while I'll retweet something that's super clever. I'm on Slack. It's almost always Morgan Whaley, just look for it, it's there. And LinkedIn, I'm pretty sure is my full name. It's out there somewhere. Cool, so here's what we're getting into. This is an audience participation talk. This is Choose Your Own Adventure. So if you're between the ages, hopefully, of like 20 and 60, you remember these books, and they were the best books. And so I am going to, each chapter of my talk is going to be a different scenario that I faced at some point on my career path, and then we are going to choose which page I turn to next. What path am I going to go down? Each one takes you down a completely different track. And so we'll go through a couple of these. Things happen, and lessons were learned in the process. So let's start this story. So what do we do when we get a job and that job kind of sucks? I have been a developer for about 7 years, and I've worked for a ton of companies. My average shelf life is about 13 months. I'm really trying to get better at that, but I have been in situations where by the second day on a job, I knew it was a bad fit. I've also had honeymoons end spectacularly early in jobs where I go in and I think this is awesome, I'm going to kick ass at this job, and then 6 months later I am hardcore looking for a new opportunity, mostly because I have a really awesome habit of building things up in my own head to make it more than it actually is. Sometimes I think that the technical interview process does this to us. If a company is willing to basically put us through, 20 hours of interviewing and code challenges and flying us places, then that must mean that it's like the best fucking job in the world, right? Wrong. It's a job, and the thing that I've learned recently is that jobs are not alive, and they are not people, and they don't know what we want, and they don't care what we want. We are the only people who care what we want. It's amazing how many years it took me to figure that shit out. So remember that. And the last thing is just like sometimes value alignment doesn't really work. The team I'm working with right now just went through essentially a value exercise. So there's a lot out there around concepts like culture fit. And people were saying, well, that term sucks. But really, just like with any kind of level of professional semantics, it's not really in the name, it's in the meaning of what's behind something. So if you claim that culture fit is somebody just like me, do they want to go get beers afterward? Is that like the value system you have? Then like, great, look for those fucking people. I don't care. As long as they have whiskey in the office. And But at the same time, value alignment can be things like craftsmanship and grit and humility and passion and a laugh that people can hear from all the way across the Union Station, and all these different factors that, that really bring teams together. And so I recently went through a process where we interviewed several candidates, and the person who really came out on top in terms of how we stack ranked our preferences was very, very clear, because we actually looked at how those values matched up. And I've also done this with job searches too, where I look for what does the team stand for. You know, I'm a front-end engineer, so I like frameworks and I work within them, but I care less if the company's using React or Angular or Ember. I do care if they're using Backbone or MooTools or YUI. I do have standards. Sometimes they're kind of shitty, but they're there. But you know, it's really more about how does that team work? Is the work that the company and the group doing something that really speaks to me personally? Because that means that I'm going to bring my best self to work every single day. And it doesn't matter if we're like curing ass cancer in orphans. I really, you know, not all the All right, so to circle back to the point of the chapter, I've had jobs that sucked. So we can go one of two ways. I could take a job within 4 weeks and just get out, just give notice after 4 weeks, which is really, really fast. Like, that's not even giving the company a chance. Or I can get an offer from a startup and talk to my current boss about it. What should I do?
Number one.
Somebody yell.
Oh. Second one.
GTFO.
First one.
GTFO.
GTFO.
GTFO? I'm getting more GTFOs. All right.
Stay.
All right, so we're just gonna get the fuck out of there. So here's what happened. I took a job that I had freelanced for in the past, so I actually didn't have to interview. It was an incredibly easy out. It was also a 50-mile each way commute. Yeah, 50 miles each way from Longmont to Belmar and Lakewood.
Get the fuck out again.
Yeah.
Should have stayed.
Yeah, the other adventure that isn't in this is that eventually I did not live in Longmont anymore, but that's like a side quest of a separate book, which is called How to Escape Boulder County with Money. So, things I figured out. That drive is terrible. It doesn't matter if you get up at 5:30 in the morning or you get up at 8 in the morning. One day it took me 3 hours to get to work. I was hungry and dehydrated and ready to cry, and then my manager came in and said, "You have a minute?" And I was like, "No." And crying gets you out of everything. I need to do it more again. It was like So I was working in an agency setting. It was totally a mixed bag situation, meaning that I got to do a lot of new stuff all the time. We had really fast client projects. Some of them were just 3-4 weeks in duration. Some of them were a long, arduous 4 months. Holy shit. The mixed bag was that it was a mix of like WordPress sites and then spinning things up on our own and then using existing projects and working with themes and other types of CMS systems. And so each project was wildly different from the next. So that's a really difficult mixed bag because it was almost too much variety. It was too much all at once of trying to keep up with new tech and also make something that maybe clients could add on to later or that I could hand off for maintenance to another consultancy at some point. So really, really challenging setting. There were also lots of situations where I was working like 80, 90-hour weeks, but you know, agencies. So the cool takeaway is I learned a whole lot about UX. I had an awesome boss who was a UX director. He came on board with us, and that's where I actually learned what user experience design was. I'd been a dev for 2 years at that point and had no fucking clue what user experience actually was. All I learned was that there was a department in another building, and they would complain if I didn't have the perfect 2-pixel rounded corners on my modals, and it pissed me off. But I learned that there's actually a method behind the madness, and we'll get more into the UX part later, but this was where I first started to learn about UX. The other part is that I became really good friends with a bunch of the people from that place. None of them are here, so I guess that says maybe I'm not that great of friends with them. They don't come see me talk. We just go to dinner and drinks and bitch about our jobs, and it's fine. So yeah, basically there were a whole bunch of great takeaways from this experience. The thing that I regret is that I did not give that company a chance to actually do anything else. I didn't give them a rebuttal. I didn't give the company I left an opportunity to counteroffer. On the flip side, they went under within a year, so I would have been looking for a job anyway, because their key client just basically said, hey, thanks for the code base, we're gonna take it and use it now, and we're gonna stop giving you money. And so they basically got jacked by that client. So that is what happened when I decided to leave a job after just 4 weeks, is this whole situation where what looked like an easy out actually became a terrific pain point in my life, because I was leaving my house at 7 and getting home at 7. And it left no time for anything else. Or, sometimes 10 o'clock or still working until midnight. There were some days where I tried to work from home because it was snowing, and I was told, oh, well, you can just leave the house at 6 a.m. And I was like, can I? Really? Like, you're giving me this privilege of leaving my house at 6 o'clock in the morning for the 3-hour drive to work? Thank you. That's terrific. So I was there for like a year and change, like about my average time frame. A lot of what kept me there was that awesome UX boss. We felt like two against the world a little bit when I was there. And it was a good experience overall, but definitely taught me the value of evaluating trade-offs a little bit better when it comes to situations like that, especially when a job looks like an easy out. It's usually then the more difficult path to walk, because the trade-offs were just super shitty. So you don't get to see the slide that would have happened. I'm not going to put this slide deck up because it has both possibilities, and you're not allowed to see that. This is never going to be the same talk twice. Or I'll just remember and put up the slides that you saw. All right, so next chapter is all about getting unstuck. As developers especially, I think it's really easy to feel like you're stagnating and you're getting stale in your craft, working on the same stuff all the time. I don't even know how much time I have. I'm just going to go till I'm done. It said till 9 o'clock, right? We're fine. Hour 10 minutes. I'm not going to do that to y'all.
Do your thing.
Sweet. You missed the first slide.
Go back.
Oh, go back.
It said all about Kubernetes. I made it when you were talking. It's like,
sorry.
Yep, that's all right. It's fine. So, yeah, basically, I get bored in jobs really, really easily. So I started to unlock, why is it that I want to leave companies within a year? And part of it is having unrealistic expectations that the job owes me something other than a paycheck, and maybe some like abstract sense of self-worth. But at the end of the day, like, the rest is 100% on me and what I bring to the table. And people always say, there are always like stupid memes on Instagram that like you get out of things what you put into them. But I do think that's correct. So what I did is I actually did a whole bunch of vision work with a career coach, and found out that I like really enjoy starting things, but I don't like keeping them. And so I don't watch football or sports, but basically I think like the best analogy is a quarterback who gets to just like throw the ball at somebody, and then they're just like, hands off, that's it, I'm done. And then somebody else has to like take that stupid ball and do something with it. And all I have to do is figure out who to pass it to. So the good thing is that now what I do at Charter is basically that work. As a prototyper, I work with UX and UI engineering teams and researchers and strategists and testers, and I spend 2 weeks building something, and then we test it, and then I don't have to touch it again, and then I get to move on to the next thing. Or I get to refactor an application to accommodate things like different buttons on the remote, trying to get rid of a bunch of them, use case testing, stuff like that. And I get to like build new cool things, but none of my code will ever actually be seen by production. The work that I do does not get sent out into the wild, and it's such a good feeling. I don't know if it feels good, man, thing to put up like Drew did, but it's totally like that. Like, every day is just a pleasure because I don't have to worry about stuff in 6 months. It's very freeing for me personally. Not everybody's like that. I totally have worked with people who love to do maintenance, who love to do long-standing products, because you can really like dive in and sink your teeth deep into a product and get to know it inside and out. And I'm like, no, I want a speed date. So the other thing that happened is I took a break from tech. My last job, I was hardly coding. The one application that I actually maintained at my last job was literally HTML files, .css files, and .js files. And there was no framework, and there was nothing else. And there was no view state, and there were no templates, and there were no routes. It was literally 1996 all over again. And it was really cool because I got to show people what it used to look like and how I learned to code back when GeoCities was a thing and I was in high school and I had no fucking friends. And it was great. But now after a year, I'm like back into technology. And so I felt like I was stuck in technology for a while. So I was afforded a break at my last job where I came in as a senior engineer and then they said, hey, you really like to teach. Why don't you go to India and teach our developers open source? And I was like, okay, I guess. And so they sent me to India. And other places to teach people about a bunch of different things. But now, you know, the thing is like a year away from coding is actually like 500 years in front end world because so many things have changed. Like when I got out of coding full-time, Vue was just like barely scratching the surface. There wasn't a whole lot around, like I hadn't even heard of fucking Kubernetes. All these different things. No one had. And I know that in 6 months things are going to change all over again. Like I never even had a chance to use Webpack. Like before this year, I was still like doing stuff in Grunt. Yay! So I had a couple things that I did in order to kind of deal with that. So I can do a couple different things when I'm stuck. I can either like pick up some side hustles to keep things fresh and keep myself energized, or I can just like quit that job again like I do and look for something new.
Side hustle.
Side hustle.
All right, good. Side hustle, best one. All right, so side hustles. I don't contribute to open source. That's a question I get a whole bunch in job interviews, and I've never done it. Ever. I've never put in a pull request on a project that anyone outside of my immediate organization sees. To me, side hustles are projects I do on the side, usually for money, or it's mentorship, or it's speaking like this. So things I found out is that a bunch of my side projects actually super duper sucked. I would think it was a great idea to go freelance for somebody, and then it would just like end really poorly because I was either doing it in addition to working full time, which meant I was up not just till 1 a.m., sometimes 3 a.m. getting stuff done for a side client. So I was essentially working 2 full-time jobs. Or I was working on the weekends. I remember I took on a side hustle once because it was going to give me back some JavaScript skills. I was also finishing my house and getting it ready to sell. And my husband and I pulled like a 24-hour overnighter to get the house ready for the open house. And during that time, my client starts sending me angry emails that me being up all night getting my house ready to sell is not important enough, and that I'd better like get up in 5 hours and start working on their project that wasn't due for several weeks. So I've had some like major dumpster fire side projects. I learned to, number one, like vet those clients a little more closely, and number two, maybe just don't do them as much. I've pulled way back on the side hustles. The other thing is that like usually the more money a side project was offering, the more pain and suffering that came along with it. The most gratifying stuff I do is the stuff like this that I do for free, or when I ran Global CFP Day workshop here for free, or I wrote an entire curriculum of educational material that teaches technical recruiters about front-end engineering and how to recruit for front-end engineering. And I got paid very little for that because it was a woman-run startup out of Boulder, and I really wanted to do something good. And that job just like gave me so many awesome feels in doing that kind of work, and that pretty much was just like worth it unto itself. It was a great project. And so those are the things that usually do it. The other thing, have you guys heard who Mark Manson is? Anyone know?
Yeah.
All right, so he wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He also has a great blog and column that's all about stuff like that. And he brought up this point that you need to find things in your life that make you forget to eat or move or go pee, things like that. And so as soon as I find something that I can like lose myself in for hours, like building this slide deck in the middle of a meeting and then someone asks me a question and it takes me a while to remember that I'm actually in a meeting for work and not just building a slide deck, those are the things that I remember like need to keep me fired up. And those are the things that help unstick me a whole lot more than just like sandboxing a project, which sandboxing and building new stuff and trying new things totally has a benefit. But I need to really care about what I'm doing in order to make that sandboxing even worthwhile. I can spin up a bunch of like apps on the side, and like my GitHub is barren. Check it out. It's so sad. There are like no green boxes whatsoever. It's really terrific. It's just gray. Because I'll set up time I work went into, because I want people to see how little I do in my spare time that's code related. Because that way it gives me a talking point to say like, well, no, I actually tend to close the laptop and go away during the evening hours unless I find a project that I care deeply about. And that's the kind of thing I can do for your company, is that if I care about what we're doing, you're going to get the best out of me. And then they go, okay, here's a whiteboarding challenge, and then I crumple to the floor and I cry. I can't do whiteboarding. Or I just hand back the marker and walk out of the room, but get a free beer on the way out. If you're going to end an interview early, just do it in an epic way. So yeah, these are, the other thing that like really helps unstick me in a process is just like starting to do stuff. I find it really easy to get stuck in the headspan of, well, this doesn't feel familiar, I don't know what I'm doing, or this client hasn't given me perfect criteria, and it's like, just fucking start working on it, and it's probably gonna like shake itself out eventually. All right, so that brings us to maintaining technical integrity. So this, I think this part is hard because probably who here like works in an Agile process that doesn't always allow just the right amount of time to get your shit ready before the demos?
Oh yeah. Everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.
I know, right? Like,
is that really possible?
I don't know, there might be one project manager here who's like, not me. So yeah, like project timelines, they suck. And usually you're like racing the clock to get to the demo or get to the end of the sprint so that you can like report your velocity. So that way the project manager's like, you didn't get your 17 story points done. And you're like, I know, because I care about what I'm building. So there's a sweet spot in the middle of that. There's craftsmanship, there's getting stuff done in a timely manner, there's figuring out how fast you yourself work. And then there's like managing all the projects and relationships outside of that, right? So, because you gotta please everybody. You gotta please your product owner, your project manager, and the clients, and your dog, because they're gonna start judging you pretty soon if you come home sad too many times, and all these different things. So with new projects, you know, it's hard to pad in enough time for architecture, for building out the right kind of testing, for building out containers, and all these different things. And then at the same time, jumping into existing projects, I've jumped into a bunch of them where there's just a ton of technical debt. And there's no time to address it because there's been a standard upheld on feature development. And there's no way to sacrifice that feature development for the sake of like getting things done the right way. And this has happened to me a ton of times where it's all about pleasing the stakeholders and making sure that like it looks good enough for the acceptance criteria, but you know, like just good enough for the acceptance criteria is usually pretty okay. Some places I will say like, you know, that this is why code reviews exist. So we got to keep each other accountable because the project manager isn't always going to go like, well, did you really code this just the right way? We had a discussion about this today in our retrospective on my design team, and we were talking about the actual quality of the work and how especially our research and testing team could run like a ton of tests in a 2-week sprint, but are they really going to be like well thought tests? Are they asking the right questions? Are they tapping into the right user base in order to get good data? And you know, how do you measure that? And this unfortunately wasn't totally sorted out in the group retrospective, but it, you know, brought up the question of like integrity in the work and how do you truly show that in the process? And I think a lot of that is the what's worked for me is just like forcing, you know, the process to slow down a little bit. But that doesn't always work. So again, we've got two choices. I can either savor a little, raise a small red flag, but really just stay detached and avoid rocking the boat or slowing down the process because we got to deliver some shit. You know, or do I rally the team, split up the work so the architecture is planned in parallel with feature development, and kind of decide what kind of trade-offs are going to happen as we're working on it?
Rock the boat.
Rock the boat. Rock the boat.
Rock the boat.
Rock the boat.
No,
and I got laid off. I've only ever been unemployed once since I was 18 years old, and I'm 35. So I've spent pretty much half my life working a shit ton. This was a really interesting experience. So I came into a project where, yeah, every sprint was just more and more tech debt on top of tech debt on top of tech debt. I did bring up a couple times with our client relationship manager, like, hey man, we're not really doing as much as we could. Our test coverage is failing. Things aren't really built the right way. I gotta rewrite this, I gotta rewrite this, I gotta rewrite this. And there's a fine line between like personal preference and things not adhering to standards. But I walked into a situation where an Angular controller contained all the logic for an application and nothing was broken out into separate directives.
Yeah.
I know, right? It was amazing. And I can't put the fault on the person who built it. The company hired a fairly new engineer who was essentially tasked with managing the client, managing the application, delivering all the features, and architecting everything from the ground up by himself in a framework he never touched before. That's so shitty. So I totally should not have taken that job. But again, I get in these situations where I think, oh man, I should just like leave immediately. Well, what's the easy out? The company that hired me for this gave me no tech screening whatsoever. Wait, I got no tech screening whatsoever at the current job. What does this say about certain situations? Ah, shit. But they did tell me, you know, hey, well, the sooner you can start, the better, because we have a guy here who really doesn't know what he's doing. So start soon. And I was like, okay. And then I started, and they said, by the way, we don't have titles. We're a flat structure, so you're not technically above this person, and you can't tell them what to do, and you just need to collaborate. And I was like, cool. Things are fucked. And they were like, you still got to deliver story points. So what wound up happening is the client that this company had hired a tech expert, like a very senior front-end dev who I super duper respect. He's not here now, I'm just like saying that because I do think it's true. And he looked at the code and he just threw us right under the bus. And he probably should have, because this company shouldn't have been billing for as much as they were billing for the work that we were doing, because the application was terrible. It would take hours to do something that should have taken a couple of minutes. It was in dire need of refactoring just within a matter of weeks. You know, and so what wound up happening is the company laid off 3 individuals that summer. Fortunately, I just sold my house, so I had a bunch of money socked away, so I was like, I'm just gonna kick it for the summer and like go hiking in Aspen and day drink, and it was amazing. So I wasn't totally sad, and I had a notion of it the week before it happened, and then when it happened, I got to call my husband, and he was like, hey, what's up? And I was like, I was right, and he's like, which one? Which thing were you right about this time? I was like, I just got fired. So stuff that I took away from that is that everybody is part product owner when you're working on a product. And you know, just because I was just the engineer, or just because I was told that I wasn't technically allowed to tell the other person what to do, doesn't mean that I should have just like jumped in and worked like blindly and quietly, literally in the corner. I was literally in the corner of our building working on this, kind of like a setup, kind of like that. You know, but not saying anything and not fighting for what I knew was true and correct. So that's something I learned, is like, pick the battles, but then like, when I pick my battles now, I fucking go to war. Don't cross me. People who know about my previous whiteboard know I don't fuck around. So that's the thing I learned, is like, put that energy into places where it matters. And so that's what I've been doing with a lot of my product work now, is that if somebody says, no, you shouldn't do that, or just get it done, I'll say like, well, why? And then they go like, well, we just need to get it done. And I say, well, here are the ramifications. Here's the trade-off. I'm also not going to work 90 hours to give you what you want without sacrificing myself, because at the end of the day, that's still me throwing myself under the bus. Because the longer you work, the more that integrity goes down, and I don't care like how much I drink, it's not going to work. You know, the other thing that I've learned at this job, as well as subsequent positions, is that the invitation to leadership is open to everybody. I am technically not a manager right now, and I wasn't a manager at my, oh shit, no.
There you go.
All right, I wasn't managing people, but I learned a whole lot about what everyday leadership looks like. And everyday leadership is being that everyday hero, meaning not that person who works until 2 o'clock in the morning. It means, fighting for what matters to you, getting people on board, and really just kind of laying that out, and just really treating the work like it matters. And that's the thing I learned is, like, if I take a job where the work matters to me personally, then it's actually really easy for me to fight for what I care about, because I actually do. All right. Now we're going to talk about workflows. Oh shit, not again. To me, that's kind of what sprints feel like sometimes. So I didn't add it to this, but my very first job was a waterfall environment. There was no Agile process there at the time. I was just given a group of tasks that the client needed, and I would get it to the point where it was like, works on my machine, and then QA would send back like 27 bug tickets. And then that would just get added to my queue. So basically, I just had endless work until the end of time. And since then, I went to like a Kanban environment, and they had like WIP limits on their columns, and I called us the subsidized American farmers, because I'd never been paid so much to do so little, because most of the time our WIP limit was reached, and I literally couldn't move a ticket from the backlog to the doing column, and so I literally just had to sit there and not work on stuff, like, for weeks. It was weird. That was the job where I lasted 4 weeks. I think I changed a fave icon. That was it. That was the only thing I contributed in those 4 weeks. And I fucked it up. Also, don't hire junior engineers and put them in a corner to work by themselves. Since then, I've also done Scrum, I've done Lean, and kind of right now, my company does nothing. We have no process. I'm on a design team. There will be more on that later, maybe. And so working with all this, I've worked with Pivotal Tracker, I've worked in Jira, I've worked in Rally, I've worked in Trello, I've worked with just like the old school style of like the giant sticky notes, moving them across a piece of tape on the wall, and like whiteboards, and all these different processes to basically be like Agile or Agile-ish. And places I've worked at were like varying degrees of severity of how much they wanted to adopt Agile process. Like the WIP limit place, totally on this end of the spectrum, no, this end of the spectrum in terms of extremeness, and then I now have a place where it's like on this end of the spectrum in terms of extremeness, where essentially like every day I am in control of everything that I work on, and no one tells me what to do, and I don't have a product person bugging me ever. They're changing that, but right now it's still at this end. It's moving this direction just a little bit, which isn't too bad. So like, I don't know a single person who's like, yeah, Jira's fine, or yeah, Pivotal's great, or Trello's pretty cool. Actually, most people I know do really like Trello, and I don't understand it, because I don't like it at all. And nobody likes Rally's stuff, as far as I know. I think they were like the most shit-talked piece of software in my last job. Just, I think because of how rigid they are. So yeah, so the question becomes, where is that like middle ground between like human intuition and everything being planned out? Because someone usually needs to know what is being worked on at any given point, whether they're a stakeholder or a manager or a senior dev or just yourself, and like wanting to know what's coming and maybe what's important and what matters, versus when too much happens, human intuition can totally suffer. It's taken me a really long time from going from like very rigid environment to very loose environment to figure out that no one's gonna come to me and give me shit to do. Which means that I could just watch videos of cats online all day, every day, or troll Slack groups, because I have like 11 of them on my personal computer, and I could like do that all day long, and no one would come to me and either give me work or tell me that I'm screwing around too much. So it's like there's a lot of potential in both directions, and where does this sweet spot lie? So I can do one of two things. I can, read the Lean Startup and decide that everyone should adopt this approach, or I can walk into no methodology and just kind of see what happens.
See what happens. Yeah, just have what happened.
All right. So I touched on this a little bit. So the team I'm on right now, I had to customize Jira. Holy fuck, that was a thing. So I feel like I could be a project manager now, except I don't want to be that person for everybody. It seems like a lot of human relationships, and I don't have the cognitive capacity for that one. So I was working on a team that literally had no process, and they decided to go Agile. And we had a contract QA person actually who turned out to have a Scrum Master certification, and she said, hey, let me get Jira set up for you guys. And then she worked for a couple days, and then she disappeared. And I don't even know, she might still have that office laptop. It's been years, but who knows, we never got it back when I worked there. I think she had life things. I don't think she was like out to like start setting up Jira and then steal a laptop, which is 2 separate pain points for a team. So then because I was like excited and trying to be a go-getter, I was like, I'll finish setting up Jira, how hard can it be? Oh shit. It was really difficult to figure out what to do for our team. The other problem with this methodology was that I was working on a team of 4 and no one else in the organization was Agile. And I found out that that's a bad idea. This was not an engineering company, it was a creative company. And the dev team that I was on was me and a UI guy and a back-end guy. And no, maybe there was just 3 of us. Yeah, there was just 3 of us. After the QA person left. Damn it! It's because I keep stepping on the cable. Come on. Get over there. Alright. It's alright, it'll come back. Probably.
Maybe.
Maybe. There we go. It wasn't plugged in completely all the way. That's better.
Is it?
Yeah, it's getting there.
The old jiggle, yeah. Did you plug it in and unplug it and put it back in again?
Write up a ticket.
Now I did.
If you try to turn it off and on.
Yeah.
Hang on. Let me try it. Try that. With that.
I bet
It's
it's
all my fault.
100%.
If we need to, I will just read the slides and y'all can imagine the content's there. This is like the one talk I made not entirely out of GIFs.
Should we like light like a trash can on fire? round table.
That's
like,
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can just have a fireside chat. We already have these like fancy little chairs.
Oh no. Cat videos?
Because the real solution is you spend all the time debugging your monitor.
Yeah. Man, we survived live coding, but like video just isn't.
Live video feed.
Can we try a different port?
And we'll try turning off the projector, maybe all the things. That's how I fix 90% of things. I made it worse.
Where does this one go?
It goes directly.
Okay, it goes directly in, so I can shift it.
I don't think it's turning on. Don't worry.
I just had to press a button.
Well, while we're getting that, I can still like talk about stuff, because why not? Because I can see what I'm saying. So yeah. So getting that team on the Agile process really didn't work. And what it kind of did was it made the nothingness worse. I went into a situation hoping that like it just flickered and I'm like, praying it'll come back, it's fine. I was really kind of hoping that the working on a small team in an organization that wasn't fully Agile was going to afford a little bit of freedom, and it didn't. So the thing that we kind of took away from that situation was that the tool, you know, one of the core tenets of Agile Manifesto, someone's going to have to help me out with this because I don't have it totally memorized, is like, communication over processes and tools. And we took that principle and just like completely flipped it on its head, and the processes and tools wound up being a huge pain point that trumped communication, not only within the team because we wanted the Jira board to do everything for us, but because, but also just because we really just kind of stopped worrying about what we were making and started worrying too much about sprints and velocity and things like that, and put a lot less energy into actual teamwork. And so we completely just like took Agile, like if we had the dumpster fire to like write the word Agile on a piece of paper and then just like drop it in.
Just
You can
unplug
just
it.
watch that. It's fine.
Just
That's
unplug
so
it.
weird. Where's the cable?
That's a
No,
weird blue.
it's not
I
a
think
cable.
it's the dongle.
This dongle?
Yeah.
It's always the dongle.
I have another dongle.
Yeah, let's try it.
It's a, yeah, hey, it's
Last
like,
thing we can try.
it's just like what Bruce said, you gotta like do this thing.
Cable. Your cable.
Do you want to take it out, press the issue mode, and put it back in, maybe?
Super sick.
I worked on it all night.
I have a real Apple dongle. It's just something list out there.
It's only $80.
Stuff.
All right, let's see.
Yep. Wait, oh.
Ah.
I mean, it's a solid color.
No signal.
Jerk.
It's kind of better.
It's blue now.
I mean, it's consistent.
I just tried a different set on my laptop.
Perfectly consistent application.
Oh, absolutely. Pass all the tests.
Let's try it.
Have you seen the
Unplug,
no-code
replug.
application? That made a thing. It's
Oh, yeah.
You
It's
try
like
turning it
no-code.
upside down.
There's a whole bunch of issues logged on.
Yeah.
There's like hundreds of issues.
That's what I'm saying. It's all the dongles, man. It's always the dongles.
It's always the dongle's fault.
It's dongle.
Yeah, this one.
Like there's
I just want to get music computer slides somewhere.
They're not. That's okay though.
Oh, shite.
I'm on like the last chapter, so we're good. Like we got most
Alright,
of the way through.
imagination.
Yes. All right. So just imagine that none of this happened and that the slide is up there.
What's on the slide?
What?
What's on the slide?
What's on the slide?
You're about to find out.
Words.
Yeah, imagine.
Customizing Jira or cat videos?
Yes, or cat videos. So then I now work on another team that had no workflow process, and they decided to go Agile and say like, well, instead of adding a bunch of process like my last team did, they were like, well, let's just add Agile and see what happens.
Oh.
And so they said, okay, we're just gonna set up like 1 hour daily stand-ups and the bi-weekly, yeah. Oh, it gets better. The bi-weekly ceremonies, and put that on everybody's calendars. And this is a design team. These are not engineers who have context for what Agile needs to be. They've been working on UI, UX, research work, that kind of thing. Most of them are totally new. Like we were getting questions of like, well, give me examples of what a blocker is, which to most of us who've worked in that environment, like it's second nature to really grok those concepts. The designers I was working with had no idea what that meant, what velocity was. Our product owner screwed up writing Fibonacci on the board, and I didn't want to be like, you forgot that too. So I just shut up and let him do it. We're just going to see what happens. So basically every week or so, a bunch of people threaten to rage quit because new meetings with no context end up on their calendars. So it was yet again another case of like, basically process trumping communication, but in the spirit of trying to facilitate more communication that would in turn generate the process. So we're still in that process at my office, and it's really kind of my team in particular, so we're going to see how it goes, and I don't want to piss off our product owner because he's new, and I'm fairly new, so I don't have enough clout to say like, hey, you're doing it wrong. When we run our retrospectives, we don't even have like a red, yellow, green column yet. But it's going to get there. So it's good, but there's a lot of lost context. Like you don't put an extra 5 hours of meetings on people's calendars and not tell them why, or tell them what it's for, or tell them that they actually don't have to go to those. So the one thing that's come out of this is that I've learned a lot about how to be more proactive with my time in my days and weeks. So every day I log into Evernote, and I look at what goals I've set up for the week, and I look at what I need to get done that day, and I update it, and then I will actually go in and like update that routinely throughout the day. And that is the thing that keeps me on track and away from the cat videos. The other thing that's helped in the past is kind of like a trick and reward system where I'll be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna like get through this one thing or get through this meeting, and then I can watch some cat videos. All right, so this is the last chapter, and it's called, wait, what am I building again? What is this? So I think probably everyone has like built something and you don't know what it's doing, what it's for, who it benefits, what it's supposed to do, how it's actually supposed to look and behave. Everyone's looking real uncomfortable. And when demo days came around, it was just like something to sweat through and to live through, and it was always just like super stressful. Not necessarily, I mean, number one, like you're racing to get all your shit done before the demo and the end of the sprint. But you know, the other part is just, are they going to accept it? Like, if there's murky acceptance criteria, are they going to say, no, this didn't work? I don't even know why I have this plugged in anymore. F that thing. And you know, the other part is just, you lose hours and hours and hours and hours spent circling back with stakeholders, with product people, with design, with all these individuals, because no one, and most of the time, usually when I would circle back and try to get answers, they would be like, well, I don't know, just do whatever you think. And I'm like, please don't make me do this. And then whatever I thought was always wrong, because that's just how it goes. So, you know, and I would see like people bickering about what something needed to be after like 6 weeks of development. So that's a thing. And you know, just like so much rewriting, like always with the rewriting of the codes to match whatever somebody wants, because it's just like, it varies sprint to sprint. Some people say like, oh, well, you know, we want to add like localization, and then you like work on that for a couple sprints, and then they go, you know what, we really don't need localization because people aren't going to be using this outside of specific areas, or you know, what have you. And so yeah, then you end up just like having to rip out efforts, and like this is why we quit jobs, among other things. So here are the 2 adventures we can pick. We can either question the fuck out of that standard and seek out a place that cares that everyone knows what's being built and why. Or we can just shut the fuck up and make the thing.
First one.
First one. Stay. Stay. Second one. First one. Second. Say it again. First one. Twist it again. Second one.
I'm hearing enough
Keep
of
your
the
mouth
first
shut.
one. So hang on, I'll reread them. All right, so the first one is question the fuck out of that standard and seek out a place that cares that everyone knows what's being built and why.
Yes.
Or shut the fuck up and make the thing.
Yes.
Question. You don't always have to
Oh my
quit.
God. I see more hands with one going number 1.
All right.
You gotta come to the talk again. With a bigger point, and then you gotta, yes, exactly.
Next month.
Sweet. All right. So basically, what I learned through that process of questioning that and moving into a place that cares is that UX design is for literally everyone, including UX designers and including engineers and including product people and including stakeholders and including biz dev and subject matter experts and all this stuff. This is cool, because this is like the simplest slide I had where I was just planning to talk about stuff. Who here knows the company IDEO? Couple people. Okay, IDEO came up with this concept called human-centered design, which is a concept around that you are making real products for real people and they need to be able to use it. That's kind of like the high-level view of it. So I worked for a company that would cram folks into a room for anywhere from 3 hours to 2 days, building a collective understanding of what's being built and why. And not only did I get to sit in on these, but I got to run them, which in and of itself is like really challenging and really amazing. So this included, everyone had to agree that we knew what the problem statement was and that it was real. We got to talk to subject matter experts and empathize with the client on what they were dealing with. We got to craft user personas, we made journey maps, we did wireframing and rapid prototyping together, and this was everybody, like even business owners had to do these practices with us. Everybody in the room had to do it. We did feature clustering, we did MVP definition. It's basically like if you read the book Sprint and made it for everyone, not just for design. I could give an entire like talk/workshop and talk about this shit forever. So basically what that did for us is it gave us definition, gave everyone a common direction to move in together. And so no one was saying, hey, why do we need this feature? And if someone wanted to push back, we had an entire backlog of fully formulated user stories with acceptance criteria, with happy and sad paths that everyone understood and agreed upon before a single line of code was written, before a single sketch file was created. It was awesome. So it worked out really well. So I learned from that, like, always question the man and figure out if there's a better way of doing things, because there usually is. So my last slide actually just says not the end in big blue letters. So just like with a black background, not a blue one, because that'd be really weird. But accessibility, because this is not really the end of this talk. Like, this talk is a living thing, like you saw. Like, we can pick different paths to go down. This is just like one step on the journey of like me navigating a technical career and figuring out how to get the most out of each job, how to bring the best of myself to each job, and hopefully some of those lessons are going to like percolate out to the rest of you. This is why I'm doing this. It's not just to stand up here and talk about myself. It's part of it. But yeah, so I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
All right, so hypothetically, you mentioned like everybody is kind of like a product manager in a way. Hypothetically speaking, what if you're voicing your opinions, your interest in trying to make some of the product better, but your CTO or whoever says, we hired you, your title is developer, not product.
Oof.
How do you handle something like that? Get the fuck out.
There's get the fuck out.
Yeah.
There's also so I think there's a couple possible ways to handle that. One is that whenever I started a company, I immediately start making allies who think the way I do about how the work should be done. And it doesn't matter what the current workflow is. I will start talking to people about how they work, what they like, what they don't like, just going to lunch with people, even if they're not in my department. So if a CTO comes to me, and I also set that expectation with my boss. Like, before I come in the door, ideally, I find out how they work. So the obvious ideal situation is that that wouldn't happen, but like, positions change, people leave me, some asshole CTO gets hired and says like, yeah, basically we don't pay you to think except about code. So in those situations, I would say like, what I generally do is I will just look for ways to, number one, commit to everyday heroics that will circumvent that directive, but are to the greater benefit of the team and leadership and client relationships regardless. Not necessarily in a passive aggressive way, but in a, I'm always going to be asking those questions. I'm going to be asking, why are we doing this? What's the benefit? And if people keep saying, well, just shut up and do it, then I'm going to escalate that to my leadership, who is hopefully on my side, or on other people on the team who are hopefully on my side. And then I'll start to gather evidence of like, hey, whenever I've actually like questioned something, we've saved, you know, time spent on, you know, redoing X, or our velocity is more accurate, those kinds of things. If those don't work, then yeah, get the fuck out. And then tell the next job that you cared so much that you had to leave. And then they'll be like, you don't need a code challenge, we're just gonna hire you. I don't know if that's totally true, but that's my dream, is no more code challenges or whiteboarding.
So most of your options were either deal with it or leave.
Yeah.
I guess your last answer kind of answers my question, but like, isn't there times where you want to change the system, where you want to push for better standards rather than either leaving or dealing with shitty standards?
Yes, in theory. Most of the time, I just don't have the energy for it. Having said that, like, I've had a bunch of situations where, like, with the job that ultimately laid me off, and that was only after 5 months, I feel like I did try to some extent to tell them, like, hey, look, this is fucked up. And I would have stayed and continued to try to fight the good fight, except they told me, no, you're not going to come in this building anymore. So there's that situation. I do think there's something to be said. Like I said, it's all about picking your battles and like what hill do you want to die on? Do you want to fight for those things that matter, and then how far can you take that? And then eventually maybe, yeah, some people just aren't open to that feedback and you can't change an organization anymore. Or you can kind of accept it and do the work. I'm not the kind of person, unfortunately, who can just like put my head down and write good code and ignore the bigger picture that's going on around me. And I know lots of people who can, and I kind of wish I was more that way because then I probably wouldn't change jobs so much. So it's hard. I don't have a really good answer to that one. I do think there's something to be said for sticking stuff out, which is why I'm trying to do that currently and actually make that happen, which is why this is not the end of this talk. Hopefully I can like relate that experience a little bit better later. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's, and it boils down to like your personal value system too. Like if you really value digging in and, you know, fighting for what matters, then like do that. But at the end of the day, it's like sometimes you can't do everything on that level. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Could you find did you have a happy ending for option B in the last chapter?
Can't remember what option B was.
It was like,
oh, shut the fuck up and make the thing do the thing.
Was it gonna end really dark?
Yeah, actually, the title of that one was Misery, period, Unemployment or Wishing for It. It did not have a happy ending.
It didn't go well.
So neutral. It ended on like a nice note, you know? The option A ended on a nice note.
It did,
Did we ever choose option 2 tonight?
Yeah, walk into no methodology whatsoever and see what happens was the second option. Let's see here. That might have been, yeah, actually that was the only one where the second choice was picked, so I might rearrange those a little bit. Anyone else? Cool, thank you everyone.
Thank you.